Yes, very much.
Good morning and welcome to the national webinar on methodological rigor in social science research, understanding COVID-19. This is jointly organized by the Loyola Institute for Social Science Training and Research and the Department of Social Work, School of Social Sciences and Humanities, Central University of Tamil Nadu, Thiruvarur. Thank you, participants, for your overwhelming response. We have crossed more than 1,500 and still receiving registration even now. May I now invite Reverend Dr. Thomas, Principal of Loyola College and Director of the Loyola Center for Social Science Research and Training, to give the opening remarks and to welcome you all. Over to Father Thomas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard Desavi. My dear friends, good morning to all of you. Let me extend a warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Loyola Institute of Social Science Training and Research, Loyola College, Chennai, and Department of Social Work, School of Social Sciences and Humanities, Central University of Tamil Nadu, Thiruvarur. It gives immense pleasure to welcome all of you for this wonderful webinar. Friends, you will agree with me, there has been a general tendency to relegate social science research for want of scientific rigor. Although we can pick up a bitter argument with the proponents of such propositions, it is needless to say that such propositions stem from our own products, however small they may be. I would even say, even if you object, that it is the social scientists who brought down the image and reputation of social science research by our own commissions and omissions. I think by our own acts of compromise in quality and by our own negligence to methodological rigor, we allowed the social science research to degenerate. It is high time we put our acts together to bring new life to social science research. Especially times like that of COVID-19 necessitates that social scientists to play a key role in bringing sense to the unfolding reality. This prolonged lockdown has hit us hard, and the social scientists, we can't remain silent. We need to explain, interpret, and bring in sense to the reality, and that's where the whole webinar becomes relevant. I am very happy that this webinar attempts to address this critical issue by bringing in competent, committed experts to discuss these issues. I thank Professor Sangamitra and Dr. J. Madan Mohan for agreeing to be with us and share their views. Both of them carry a huge, rich experience, and their publications speaks volume about their own engagement with the society and their commitment to social science research. So thanks a lot for agreeing to be with us. Sure, we look forward to a very engaging and enriching interaction with you. I also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Sigamani, the professor and head of Department of Social Work, the School of Social Sciences and Humanities, Central University of Tamil Nadu, for conceiving this relevant topic and identifying the right resource persons for this webinar. Sure, his own vast experience and international exposure has made this a reality. Sure, this interaction will bear its fruits because of his presence and interaction. I also thank Dr. Bernard Desavi, as Senior Fellow, Coordinator of Loyola social science research training and research. Sure, he also carries a huge, vast experience on various issues and his own contribution to the larger social research. Sure, all these people will bring their rich experience for us to share and partake. So I wish all the participants of this webinar an enriching learning experience. The organizing team will be thankful if you can bring pertinent issues to the table for discussion, so that the entire discussion and deliberation will be a rewarding learning experience for all of us. So with these few words, while I thank all of you, and let me wish you all a wonderful day and enriching day for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Thomas, for the welcome note. We have Dr. Sigamani Paneer with us. Dr. Sigamani Paneer is the head and professor, Department of Social Work, School of Social Sciences and Humanities, Central University of Tamil Nadu, Thiruvarur. He is also the coordinator of the Center for Happiness. With a vast research experience and himself an alumnus of JNU, may I now invite him to introduce the theme and the speakers, also to moderate the session. Over to Dr. Sigaman.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Most respected Reverend Father Dr. A. Thomas, Principal, Loyola College, Chennai. Respected Dr. Bernard, Coordinator, Loyola Institute of Social Sciences, Training and Research, Loyola College. Most respected Dr. Sangamitra Ma'am, Professor and Chairperson of Center of Social Medicine and Community Health, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Our dear friend, Dr. Madan Mohan, Assistant Professor, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi, colleagues, friends, and delegates from India and abroad. I warmly welcome you all to the one-day webinar on Methodological Rigor in Social Science Research, Understanding COVID-19, jointly organized by Loyola Institute of Social Science Training and Research, Loyola College, Chennai, and the Department of Social Work, School of Social Sciences and Humanities, Central University of Tamil Nadu, Thiruvarur. COVID-19 is an infectious disease caused by a newly discovered coronavirus. Till today, the COVID-19 has affected more than 216 countries and territories around the world, have reported a total of close to 10 million confirmed cases and a death toll of around 5 lakhs cases. The COVID-19 pandemic, associated directly with economic and social crisis, are posing huge challenges on social development, emerging issues related to jobs, livelihoods, and income of millions of people, gender issues, social safety net, income support schemes, burden on informal sector workers across the globe. With this background, we have conceptualized the webinar theme and the schedule, Methodological Rigor in Social Science Research, which refers to the soundness and precision of a study in terms of planning, data collection, data analysis, and report writing. Furthermore, so rigor in research is normally conceived of as the means by which integrity and competency are confirmed. I'm sure you will agree with me that substantial proportion of the scientific community associates research quality with methodological rigor. I sincerely hope the webinar will be a great platform to debate and discuss methodological rigor in social science research, understanding COVID-19. Establishing rigor in research studies, including the methodological trinity of reliability, validity, and generalization, and expose some of the issues relating to establishing rigor in social science research, especially during the COVID pandemic crisis. I hope all the participants will be benefited from today's academic discussion and presentations, and it will enhance theoretical, methodological, and empirical novelty. It is a privilege for me to welcome you all once again to the webinar. I would like to welcome Professor Sangamitra ma'am, who will speak on the methodological rigor in social science research. With immense pleasure, let me take this opportunity to introduce Professor Sangamitra ma'am. So Professor Sangamitra Acharya is an eminent scholar in the area of health and development, particularly health equity, social determinants of health, marginalities, inclusive health policy, and urban health. At present, she is the chairperson of the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health, School of Social Sciences, JNU, New Delhi. She has been director the Indian Institute of Dalit Studies, New Delhi, during 2015 and 18. The Indian Institute of Dalit Studies is an Indian Council for Social Science Research recognized institution located in Delhi. She was a visiting faculty at the University of Philippines, Population Institute, Manila, and Department of Sociology, Ball State University, Indiana, and Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Beijing, China. She has been honored with several international fellowships and grants such as ICSSR CASS, Indo-China Cultural Exchange Fellowship, Asian Scholarship Foundation Fellowship, and United Nations Population Fund Fellowship, and many more. She has undertaken and successfully completed more than 10 research projects in the area of social epidemiology of access to health, urban environment and health, population issues, health and development, sponsored by UGC, MHRD, ICSSR, Ministry of Women and Child Development, Government of India, SARTAT, American India Foundation, UNICEF, USAID, etc. She has published 4 academic reference books with academic publications and Springer, articles in international and national reputed journals, and media articles. She has also participated in several national and international conferences and workshops and delivered keynote, plenary talks, and invited lectures in several universities and institutions across the globe. She has successfully supervised 28 MPhil, 4 PhD dissertations, and 16 doctoral theses, and life member of 11 professional associations and institutions across the globe. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind acceptance. Now, I would like to hand over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sigamani, for your very kind words in introducing me. I'm still a very humble student of what all you've talked about me. Thank you nevertheless. At the onset, I would really wish to put on record my gratitude to the 2 institutions, LISSTAR and CUTN, who have decided to come on board for this very important idea of debating across on something which is unprecedented in the form of COVID-19. And research is so much awaited in terms of understanding this pandemic, the health crisis, which we have we are facing. And therefore, I think I would want to put on record Father Thomas and Dr. Vertnan Disami to, along with Professor Sigamani, to have come together in bringing this very important event. And I'm really overwhelmed to know that it's been participated by so many people, so many participants. So that itself perhaps shows the relevance of this topic that you've embarked upon. Not taking much of your time, what I'm going to do is, I'm trying to share the screen. Is it shared now? No, not as yet. I'm trying to share the screen. Is my screen shared now? Hello, hello, Dr. Sigamani, is my screen not as yet, is it?
Not yet, ma'am, not yet.
Okay, I'll just try again. So while I make my attempt to share the screen, it says all participants. Why isn't it sharing? Okay.
Ma'am, bottom you will find the shared screen option, ma'am.
Yeah. I'm using that only. And I'm clicking on what I want to share also.
Double click on that
While I
slide.
make my attempt to share the screen.
Samson, you want to?
Sharing.
Would you like to share?
Okay. Bottom you will find share screen option. Yeah. I'm using that only. And I'm clicking on what I want to share also. While I make my attempt to share the screen. I have also sent the PPT to Xavier, but I am trying to share. It's not allowing me to share the screen. I'm sorry. I'll try it again. In the meantime, I would probably continue talking. What I'm going to share right now is, as the topic is alluded, we want to understand what are the methodological rigors in research vis-a-vis COVID-19. So the idea perhaps is to see research from the perspective of COVID-19. I am not able to share it. I think the host has to do something to it.
Dr. Xavier?
Yeah.
Is it now I think it's shared, is it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I got really worried what's going wrong. Okay, so now that the screen is shared, I am going to reiterate on what perhaps as a teacher I've been sharing with my students in terms of what is it that we talk in terms of research, what is it that we understand in terms of research, and how do we actually get about doing that, and now in the light of COVID-19. So very simply, to me, I think when we talk in terms of, when we look around ourselves, I think there's something which is happening in terms of research. You know, every time, I'm sure most of us during this lockdown period would have searched for a lot of online websites to look at the places, look at the things that we can buy, etc., etc. Media has been researching in different forms of public interest, perhaps especially in the times of elections, which government will take over, etc., etc. Industry goes on to do research in terms of doing consumer poll, which of the products are more important as compared to others, and therefore marketing strategies can be evolved. Students try and do some kind of search to fit into what are the readings that they can use for doing a particular assignment as you move ahead from your graduate level to higher levels. We do look around what are the empirical evidences, what are the information that we can use to write a project, to prepare a research paper, term paper that we're supposed to be doing. Business consultants perhaps look for solutions through researching different different aspects of what could be prevalent in the market, what could be prevalent in the scenarios of corporate houses, how best to organize. But this actually cannot really be termed as research, because research has a scientific component. What we do in everyday parlance is not really, it doesn't really fit and qualify to be called as scientific research, for the simple reason because that research necessarily, what we do in the name of research, has to contribute to the existing body of science, and it has to be rigor in terms of its methodology. It has to be strictly followed in order to have certain procedural element in it. And therefore, it's important that we collate, that we organize some kind of observation, understanding of those observations, and interpreting those observations in a way that it allows us to draw certain inferences, which could be useful for us as academicians, which could be useful, more importantly now in the light of COVID-19, to the policymakers. And therefore, I think this whole process is embedded in this idea or in this discipline, which we often label as epistemology? How do we understand the world around us? How does that understanding takes us on in terms of validating that knowledge? We all know that the sun is in the center of the universe, but before that, I'm sure it was the earth which was believed to be in the center of the universe. And that's where perhaps the observations and the scientific mode of research went in to nullify the idea that earth is in the center of the universe was incorrect. What was really in the center of the universe was sun. So the point I'm making is how notions, how information, how knowledge bases can also change over the period of time. So in that context, therefore, it's important for us to understand that scientific knowledge is the basis of any kind of research. This is what we need to generate, which can be generated, which rest in some forms of laws and theories. Why laws and theories? Because these are what formulate and allow us to explain the phenomena around us, which instill the behavior that we as individuals, we as human beings can embark upon. Because most of the time, social sciences, we are dealing with human behavior. That human behavior can have an interface with other elements. It can have an interface with animals also. But the basis, the crux is of understanding human behavior. And therefore, I think when we try and understand this from perhaps one of the most stark theories which we all are familiar with, we've learned in school perhaps, the Newtonian's law of motion. The three aspects which Newton observed. Why is it that an object remains still, rests, it doesn't move? Why is it that it moves? What propels that motion? And then what happens when when perhaps more than one objects collide? So these observations are something which was analyzed, interpreted to reach to this theory that we today recognize as the Newtonian's law of motion. Similarly, therefore, I think what becomes necessary for us to understand in terms of research is how do we discover these laws? How do we postulate these theories? And to do this, it's important to understand what are the social phenomena around us that we might be interested in, because that is what propels the existing knowledge and widening the scope of existing knowledge. How do we do that? We perhaps, like I said, observe, make certain observations, analyze those observations. And by doing that, in that process, we may be in a position to be able to verify which was already existing or refute that. And the example I gave in terms of the earth and the sun, the knowledge base was able to refute what was existing from before. We might be able to corroborate certain informations, and there are ample examples in social sciences that we probably would want to take on as we move ahead. For example, very, very simply, if I would wish to put, income and health status could be perceived as having inverse relationship. And a good number of studies tell us about that. So the point I'm making is that there's certain order in which we understand these observations, extract information out of these observations through understanding, through interpretation of these observations in a very systematic way. And to do this, we necessarily have to understand that the process of research has a set of elements which are very important. To begin with, theory and facts. Like I said, theoretical understandings, theoretical propositions help us in move ahead with what is it that we would wish to understand. Say, for example, if I go back again to this very stark example of the earth, the erstwhile understanding of knowledge, that the earth is in the center of the galaxy and center of the universe. So to be able to question that notion at that time point and move ahead to with the understanding, with the belief that this is something which needs to be investigated, and then the process of investigation happens, and then the inference is drawn allow us to get into the new realm of knowledge, which is that universe is really, the sun is which is the body, celestial body, which is in the center. And over this period of time, therefore, certain factual empirical evidences were evolved to get into them. So theories and factual information feed into each other to propel research. We may be able to make observations of existing empirical evidences, use those to derive certain theoretical prepositions, right? And once we are doing this, we might be in a position to question what is it that we want to research, what is it that we want to understand. And in that process, we evolve certain hypotheses. Okay, if this is the area I want to question, what is it? What could be a tentative answer to test for this research question that I might be interested in? And for this, we might have certain concepts to be evolved. For example, if I'm interested in understanding that socioeconomic status has played an important role in access to healthcare services during COVID-19. So socioeconomic status, for example, becomes an important concept to deal with. How do we disaggregate? How do we understand that? COVID-19 itself, the way the infection has evolved, the disease is being perceived, the care, the whole protocol of addressing the disease has evolved. So in doing so, we will evolve certain definitions, which will be at a conceptual level in terms of explaining what are these concepts. And at the second level, how do we operationalize it? How do we measure it? So that when we say socioeconomic status, maybe we might want to measure it in a particular way in terms of maybe levels of literacy, or maybe income levels, or maybe my linguistic background, etc., etc. And we'll come there to do a bit of detail over there in a short while. And to be able to make these constructs, make these concepts measurable, we make use of the variables. So those are the pointers which allow us to, what kind of data do we need to make our research happen? And this is roughly what I would say is the process through which we sail in terms of doing research. What's existing already, we might want to review it. And from there, we might be able to identify certain gaps. And then after the gaps have been identified, we might want to understand what exactly could be the method which we can use to collect our data, and then analyze the data to be able to inform what are the outputs, what are the results of that data. And that finding may be equally important, because it not only be in a position to substantiate what is already an existing body of knowledge, but it is also likely, it is usually propelling another set of information, another set of questions to deal with. So when we talk about the methods, very starkly, two very broad ways in which we often do research are listed as quantitative methods versus qualitative methods of research. Very often we try and disaggregate between the two. Now in the realm of mixed methods, it's all the more important that we figure out what are these two. Quantitative largely has a very linear kind of positioning in terms of inquiry. You make certain observations vis-a-vis already designed frame in which your objective or the research question could be based. You try and collate certain empirical evidence, and based on those empirical evidences, which will be collected under certain strict maneuver of a methodology, a method that could be employed, a tool, research instruments, and then you are in a position to come up with certain findings. In contrast, to a certain extent, when we are attempting qualitative methods, it takes on to understand what exactly could be phenomena, what is it that really allows these processes to happen. So on the one hand, if I may contrast, while quantitative methods allow us to give us the very quantified version of understanding, in terms of proportions, in terms of numbers, in terms of various quantitative methods that we could employ. Qualitative methods allow us to be able to explain through the understanding of the processes which have led to these inferences. Suppose, for example, if quantitative data has allowed us to see in village A, n number of children have remained outside the school, have never visited the school, right? The qualitative methods will allow us to examine what are the reasons, what are the processes through which these children, because of which these children have remained outside the school. So that becomes important marker in terms of understanding the relevance of qualitative versus quantitative methods. Therefore, I think it's important to understand the three levels at which we usually place research: the exploratory, when the ideas and insights perhaps are looked at in terms of what the research problem is, who is associated in this kind of investigation that could be done, where is it happening, what is it happening, and the moment we cross from who, when, what, and how to why we are indulging in the processes. It is also the level where comparatively scanty information is available and you need exploration to happen over there. Questions of, there are certain research problems which perhaps need, for which we know very little. And to me, at this moment, I think COVID-19 is one of those problems that we're very little aware of what exactly is happening. Even now, when we have certain protocols which have been put in place, for example, using the mask itself, we really do not know what is the efficacy of this protocol that we are following. There are different kinds of information which have been generated. So we're still in that phase of evolving in terms of what that research question is leading us to. So there are a whole lot of insights that are coming in. The other level could be where we want to be very, very precise and accurate in terms of describing what the phenomena is. Say, for example, the number of confirmed cases, for instance, what is the the realm of death that is happening. So to me, I think the three levels, often when interpolated, the third level being explanatory, wherein perhaps we are in a position to establish the causality. So that becomes important for us to take on board. I'll pause over here. Do I have a couple of minutes more, the organizers? Dr. Sigamani, do I have a couple of minutes more? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. 3 minutes.
Okay. So I'll quickly wrap up in 3 minutes. So some of these designs which we probably can embark upon, very conventional designs when we look at research from the perspective of conventional experimental designs. Very quickly, there can be a scenario wherein we might want to investigate what is happening. Say, for example, the hotspots. So what has happened in the hotspots before the levels of testing, going by Delhi, for example, the testing across the country has improved tremendously. So what was the scenario before the testing levels were enhanced versus what is happening after the testing levels have enhanced? So the difference between X and Y will actually allow us to explain what has happened by the intervention which has happened in the form of testing. Similarly, we might want to expand that to make it a little more robust. We might have a control area alongside this, and then maybe look at the difference between the test area wherein the intervention has happened, wherein the number of tests increase versus the other one. Then we might also have a scenario, we might also wish to design it in terms of making it comparatively more robust, wherein we have 2 time point scenario, wherein one is at the 2 time points, we have a test area and we have a control area. Test area largely where the intervention is happening, and the control area where the intervention is not happening, maybe places where the plausible number of testing hasn't really increased. And therefore, we can see this effect and make comparisons and allow in some form the policy references can be culled out from there. Something which has really become very relevant and also being used in social science research is the randomized controlled trials. And to me, I think we might want to have a look at it, wherein what is exactly done is random allocation from a given population into what could be the test group and what could be the control group. And then the outcomes for both of them are measured. If you allow me a couple of minutes more, I would want to go into this. Otherwise, I can stop here also.
Ma'am, six more minutes, ma'am, we can have.
Okay, I heard it as 2, so I was trying to
Yes, we can have 6 more minutes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So just to quickly go through, and I'm sure we can come back in terms of the question answers. When we're posing the research question, it's very important for us to frame it in such a way that it is very specific and very clear. So a research question necessarily has to be such that it can be empirically tested. It shouldn't be a question which cannot be empirically tested. And I'm just giving you some examples. Say, for example, a question such as, should COVID-19 be tested? Is it right to have capital punishment? These are very wide kind of statements which are being made without any specific focus to it. So general statements don't really make much sense when they need to be researched upon. For research, they have to be problematized. And therefore, we have to remove the vagueness, we have to remove the ambiguity until and unless we make them more specific. Say, for example, has the incidence of child abuse risen during COVID-19? How does poverty affect children's health access to education? So there is some kind of focus and specificity being built in over there. Therefore, there can be an exploratory question. Has the actual incidence of child abuse increased in Delhi during COVID-19? Is child abuse more common in families who have experienced, let's say, marital discord, etc.? Or perhaps lack of funds, perhaps can be one issue which might. So there's some way in which you're opting for that kind of focus over there. And then it's important to move towards hypothesizing that research question, which we might want to take on. So perhaps when we looking at the question pertaining to COVID-19, one question could be, given the scenario that we have been kind of reading about, we can probably want to investigate, is travel associated with COVID-19 infection? And therefore, it becomes important to be able to identify which are the variables which will need it to be examined. So in this kind of association, what becomes an independent variable? What becomes a predictor? What becomes the cause? Is travel, therefore, an independent variable to have caused COVID-19? So some kind of logical association needs to be drawn whenever we are choosing a topic to think about in terms of hypothesizing, in terms of being able to research it. And therefore, I think validity and reliability become very relevant for our research. Just a couple of pointers on that. A research necessarily has to be both reliable and valid, but many a times we attain one over the other. Reliability is far more easier to attain in our research as compared to validity. So when we are saying reliable research, what we are basically saying is that each time we are measuring a particular phenomena, the answer supposedly comes out to be same, but that necessarily not be valid. For example, if I am weighing myself in a bathroom scale, the results will probably be same if I haven't put on weight or if I haven't added some woolen clothes and so on. So that meaning to say that the original element has not been superimposed with something additional. So the weight will remain same. The second element would be the instrument which is being used for measurement has not changed, has not been modified. That's when the reliable realms would be becoming important. On the other hand, when we're talking of validity, it's also important is that whatever we have set ourselves to measure, our instrument is allowing us to measure that. Say, for example, if we want to measure care utilization, some of the indicators which we might want to take to measure care utilization could be number of visits to the doctor, for example, number of times, the protocol of use of medicines, the pathological tests, for example. So is that are these constructs, the indicators allowing me to be able to measure the contrast? Therefore, I think it's important to be able to understand that the consistency in having that kind of result need not necessarily lead us to be valid. For example, if I bring you, just for the sake of perhaps elaborating on that, if we try to measure a can which is, let's say, of 5 kg, we know it. We weigh on a machine which is giving a consistent result of 4.67 kgs. Machine is all right. There's a reliable result which is coming, but it is not valid because we know it should be 5 kilograms and it's not coming to 5 kilograms. Therefore, it's reliable, but not valid. So a pointer which we can therefore say is vis-a-vis this example of bull's eye. When we are hitting, when the target is hitting right in the center of the bull's eye, we are hitting the bull's eye, and each time we are hitting that bullseye. So every time we hit the bullseye, the reliability is that you're hitting what you wanted to hit. And anytime, therefore the consistency in whatever, each time that what you are hitting, and also the target that you're hitting. Unlike when the reliability is high, you might be hitting the same part of the board, right? Say, for example, this segment. So that's reliable. You're doing the fairly well in terms of being reliable. But what you're actually supposed to hit is this, and you're not hitting that. Therefore, the validity is very low. Third scenario is where both reliability and validity could be very, very low when we are hitting all over the place. And most of the time, our journey in research has to be from here through this to this. And if we are in a position to do this, I think we're done with it. Because, and I would want to say this is important because the whole idea of making research become representative of what we are, where we are embedding the larger population, the population on which we are researching. And we cannot do research in the larger population, therefore we sample out populations and research. Therefore, when we're talking about the validity of especially the constructs, the indicators that we would wish to make use of for measurements, they can be understood in two ways. One is the definitionalist perspective to understand the concepts, wherein we very precisely say this will be the construct to operationalize it. Say, for example, when I was saying number of visits to the doctor, for example, that's how I'm defining it. This is what I'm going to measure it. So this is how we could probably think in terms of a definitionals. But there's the other element to me which becomes very relevant, particularly in terms of understanding COVID-19, is where we are looking at the relational aspect. Meaning to say, if I have to see what was happening to me as a migrant worker who had to go back home in the light of no work altogether, what was happening to my self-esteem in terms of not having job, in terms of not having any housing, in terms of not having food, in terms of not even having enough water to wash my hands, what was being propagated so very widely. So in that sense, was it enough to talk about self-worth? Was it enough to talk about self-confidence, etc., etc.? So from one perspective, I could have emphasized as a researcher on perhaps self-worth or confidence, or maybe a mix of two. So the point I'm therefore making is our own assessment of the issue, our own training would allow us to be able to exactly construct that relationship of the phenomena that we are trying to examine. So largely, therefore, what's important is that to make the research valid, to enhance the validity, what we understand in terms of the given sample which we have examined need necessarily be in a position to be generalized to the larger population. This is what the idea of validity or the need of validity in research is, which brings about the rigor in research. I think I'll stop here, and I'm sorry if I've shot over the time. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Segamani.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for intellectually stimulating presentation on rigor in social science research. Due to the time constraints, we will have questions and answer session at the end. Our next speaker, Dr. Madan Mohan. So Dr. Madan is an assistant professor in diplomacy and disarmament at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, known as CIPOD, at the School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi. His research interest includes research methodology, international relations theory, critical security studies, humanitarian intervention, nuclear politics, globalization, social justice, and society and politics in India. He has convened panel and presented a paper at the British International Studies Association annual conference in 2013 and 14. He was a consultant at Global Public Policy Institute Berlin on global norm evolution and the responsibility to protect. He published articles in reputed journals and book chapters in international reputed publishing houses with reputed journals including the Journal of Conflict, Security and Development, Global Society, South Asian Survey, etc. Thank you so much, Dr. Madan, for your kind acceptance to be part of the panel. Over to you, Dr. Madan. Dr. Madan.
My sincere thanks to Professor Bernardi Sami, Dr. Sigamani, Father Principal, my colleague in JNU, and all the participants from different parts of the country and perhaps abroad. I would like to thank Almighty God for making this event possible. The title of the discussion is, quote, Methodological Rigour in Social Science Research, Understanding COVID-19, unquote. First, the context. There is a certain context in which the current webinar takes place, and that we all know is the outbreak of SARS-CoV-19 as an infection or COVID-19 as a disease. And this outbreak continues to have a corrosive impact on all our lives. Amidst this seemingly gloomy scenario, here we are staring at a challenge. How could we retain and strengthen methodological rigor in social science research, especially when the conditions are not favorable, when the situation is not conducive? This is the puzzling question that we shall grapple with in this webinar, especially in my presentation. Now we move to the argument. Two arguments here. First, the necessity or the importance of methodological rigor remains intact. And in addition to this first argument, to make it more interesting and perhaps complicated, the second argument is that methodological rigor in social science research remains more important than ever before. How do we buttress or substantiate these arguments? Before we get into the groove of substantiation, let us take a break and dwell on the backdrop or the background, as the case may be. Now, this backdrop could be understood at three levels. First, that there is a current debate or discussion in the literature. In certain circles, apprehensions are being raised about the quality of research in the scenario after COVID-19. The concern is that quick and sloppy research should not become the central tendency or the dominant trend in the new normal. As we know, the new normal is a scenario after COVID-19 and its attendant ramifications. The second dimension with regards to the background is this, which is that skeptics and critics question whether social science has a primary role to play at all in the current scenario. The implicit comparison is, of course, to pure scientific research, which understandably has an urgent and indispensable role to play in the current scenario. I would like your attention, I would like you to draw your attention to the debate that you may have seen, say between Anthony Fowler in Bloomberg and the response, say, by Sandro Gallia, published in the Times Higher Education, which is published from London. Now, apart from these global concerns, there are problems that are particular or peculiar to this part of the world. And what I mean by this part of the world is India. And here, to complicate matters, we have the third concern. This is the third facet in terms of background, which is that the degree or level of methodological rigor in social science research undertaken in this part of the world, in India, with due regards, especially in disciplines such as political science and international relations, is low. The comparison is to the quality of social science research done generally in, say, the United Kingdom, Europe, and the US. There is a concern, which is reasonable indeed, that on an average, the quality of research work done in the social sciences in general, and in politics and international relations in particular, is low. It is not up to the mark, and it is not certainly world-class. Now, whichever way you measure the quality of research work, it could be in terms of methodological rigor, or it could be in terms of theoretical innovation. There is a concern, I think, which needs our attention. And I think we need to get onto the track of self-criticality as to why the quality of research work is indeed a matter of great concern. We could be content with the state of the art in India, or remain comfortable in the National Institute ranking framework, NIRF. It is up to us. Well, NIRF has a certain rationale. We acknowledge that, we respect that. However, the hard-nosed question to focus upon is simple. And this is the pertinent question. Are we pursuing world-class research? And how could we retain and, in fact, strengthen methodological rigor in the post-pandemic scenario? Now, there are two questions here. The first one, are we implying the academic, are we, by which I mean the academic community in India, pursuing world-class research? Well, you know the answer. I've always felt that I've learned more from my students. Now, the answer, in my opinion, is perhaps few and far between in terms of world-class research produced in this country in social science, especially in politics and international relations. I shall not get into this question at this stage, but it is extremely important that instead of always basking in the glory of the past or the potential of the future, we should be extremely self-critical, thereby taking a stock of what it is in terms of the present, in terms of the state of affairs of social science research in India. The second question is the most pertinent one for the discussion this noon, and that is, how could we retain and strengthen or reinvigorate methodological rigor in the scenario after COVID-19? Herein, I would like to make 3 points. First, preferably, we should continue to raise or pose or formulate puzzling research questions. Puzzling research questions which are also normatively grounded. In other words, we need to formulate questions that do not just go against the grain, to quote James Derrida, or questions that rupture conventional wisdom, but we also need to raise questions that revolt against the status quo. These questions may be unsettling for the sovereign state, for the system of states, or for the society of states, for the society, or for the state-society complex. But nevertheless, we should raise questions that are intellectually exciting, theoretically refreshing, normatively stimulating, and methodologically challenging. Because these questions set the process of unlearning, not learning, unlearning in motion. For instance, just to give a clue to how these questions could potentially shape in political science and international relations, one could be, what is morally deficient about the sovereign state? The second could be, what is wrong with international relations? The second point that I would like to submit in all humility is that social science research could embrace the concerns of critical theory. Mind you, critical theory is not a single animal. It is not a monolith. Chris Brown makes it quite clear in a seminal article which is titled Turtles All the Way Down. There are several strands of thinking within the larger canvas of critical theory. You could choose your pick, or we could innovate on something new. Whatever it is, insights from critical theory are relevant for methodological rigor on 3 important counts. 1, context. Context matters. 2, history, the relevance of history. And 3, the necessity for change. Let me dwell on each of these points quickly. First, on context or contextualization. It is important that we remain sensitive to the specificities of the context and also empathetic to the peculiar circumstances in which certain vulnerable sections of the society are placed in society. The temptation of the fad is to do a broad brush generalization. The need of the hour and the methodological rule of the thumb is to be cognizant of differences, celebrate diversity, respect multiplicity. It is tempting to do comparisons. After all, comparison is a natural human tendency. It spills over in research, but it should not affect our research or mar our research. Crude comparisons ought to be avoided. If we are advised not to compare apples and oranges, unless you argue like Kenneth Walsh would, which is that in any case, apples and oranges are fruits, and what is the harm in comparing? But I don't really buy Kenneth Walsh's argument. So we cannot compare apples and oranges. How could we compare different states or countries or different constituent states within India, or for that matter, different societies, different cultures? Next, we move on to history. Historicizing the phenomenon of investigation is extremely important. Here, the caution is against ahistorical research. For instance, Wallsian theory in international politics is considered as ahistorical by Paul Schroeder. Next, we move on to change, the quest for change. The quest for change will be the name of the new game in social science research. As you may have observed, you probably know better than me, there is an increasing marginalization of the disadvantaged sections of the society, such as economically poor, women, the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in India, religious minorities in India, ethnic minorities in India and the world over. More than ever before, we as social science researchers have an academic obligation to highlight and address the predicament of the vulnerable sections of society in a methodological rigorous and a theoretically robust fashion. To quote Karl Marx, quote, philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in many ways. The point, however, is to change it, unquote. Going beyond the emancipation of the proletariat, Professor Andrew Linklater speaks about the emancipation of the species. To quote Professor Linklater, quote, critical theory argues that knowledge about society is incomplete if it lacks an emancipatory purpose, unquote. He also focuses on as to how the sovereign state ought to become a moral community and not just remain as a political entity alone. As I mentioned earlier, you could choose your pick, your inspiration. It could be Gandhi, it could be Ambedkar, it could be Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy Nayakar, or it could be Aringersi and Annadurai. But the status quo, the social, economic, and the political must change. The final point when it comes to as to how we could in fact retain and strengthen methodological rigor is critical, which is breaking the disciplinary boundaries. Sadly, interdisciplinary research, in spite of the insistence of successive governments, this interdisciplinary research is more of a rhetoric than a reality in this country. Now, interdisciplinary research is yet another way in which social science research could reinvigorate or retain its salience. In practice, academics are content to remain in their disciplinary comfort zones, and they are quite conscious. This practice of being in the comfort zone of disciplinary boundaries is a passé. It is outdated. Interdisciplinary research ought to become a new reality in social science research. In conclusion, we all know, and we are on the learning curve, and I'm as much as a student here, COVID-19 has made a rupture. This rupture in the post-COVID-19 scenario unwittingly has been providing new avenues and fresh opportunities. Webinar, including this one, is one such opportunity. Undoubtedly, the new normal poses constraints, but also presents a few opportunities. To quote Shakespeare from As You Like It, Act 2, Scene 1, quote, sweet are the uses of adversity, unquote. Or we could quote Oscar Wilde, the genius, quote, nothing should be out of reach of hope, full stop, life is a hope, unquote. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Madan, for brilliant critical discourse analysis. I'm just looking forward to get some questions from our participants. I have a question, which we will start with that. Dr. Madan, this question addressed to Dr. Madan. So what are the challenges before us when we practice the transdisciplinary research in our country? Because the social sciences research is underfunded. We don't have access to available resources too. We have very limited access. In that context, how we'll face that kind of challenge during this critical period? What is your take on this?
My opinion is that mostly interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary research, there are minute differences between these terms, does not take off, except say in IITs, in Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, or probably in a few centers in JNU for that matter. And I think there are several constraints. One, as I have pointed out, is that the academic community considers their disciplinary boundary as sacrosanct. So they would often question, if you work on a theme which cuts across disciplines, what is it in terms of this research, say for international relations? Where is international relations here? Right. So this is a practical dimension. The second dimension is also that there is no conversation taking place between, say, scientists and social scientists. I think what COVID-19 will do, and it is already doing, is to kickstart research clusters cutting across disciplines. You could have a research cluster, say, of international relations, sociology, or in fact, as Madam Professor is working on social health, social medicine. But I think for that, we need to step outside our comfort zones. It is challenging. Social scientists will have to be conversant with quantitative methods. They could no longer say that these are not relevant. They need to learn whatever language that is useful in social research. If mathematics is a language, they need to learn it. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. Ma'am, we have a question for you from Mr. Balasubramani.
Yeah.
Let me just read out. I have one clarification with you, ma'am. Without strong identification of research problems, how possible doing a research like you are saying, hypothesis, research questions, review, qualitative and quantitative, etc.? I know it's a long question.
I know. I think I get the essence of the question. You see, when we are speaking on a platform such as this and trying to talk about something which is spread across the semester, it becomes difficult to be able to hold on to everything in terms of details. Nevertheless, my understanding of your question is that what are the positions that these elements in research, like a research question or hypothesis, etc., hold. I would like to begin from where Dr. Madan has left. You know, when we are talking of research for an issue, if I can use that term, such as COVID-19, as very rightly pointed out by Dr. Madan, the realm of interdisciplinarity, and considering that this is one health crisis which has cut across countries, the international relations, and we've seen the kind of debates which have evolved in any case, have special place in coming on board when it comes to researching. And from that perspective, there are no hard and fast boundaries that you must have a hypothesis or you must have to begin versus point C. And that's where perhaps when you tread onto the realms of qualitative research, it allows you to move back and forth in questioning the very objective with which you could have moved or started. Because as you move into the field collecting evidences, there is a possibility that you would wish to revisit the question that you may have started with. Similarly, when we see this question of hypothesis in the backdrop of inductive versus deductive research, we know that there is a possibility that empirical evidences allow us to reach towards formulating certain hypotheses, and certain hypotheses may be tested to result in certain other theoretical propositions. So there is no hard and fast rule. Variables, for example, can be the outcome variables for one kind of research, and they may actually become at another level. Maybe within the same research also, they could be different at different time points. The nature of the variables can change. So it's the framework in which you formulate your research question. What is the thrust therefore? What is your orientation? What's your training? And why, above all, do you wish to do this research? Therefore, the rationale for this inquiry, whichever you wish to take, becomes very important in perhaps answering the question that you're posing vis-a-vis research. So in fact, I'm really happy Dr. Madan has actually complemented what I have tried to put in terms of stark, empirical kind of situation. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Segamani.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another very interesting question. Ma'am, can you suggest some good books for undergraduate students in Hindi also?
Yeah, I think I thought as much. Maybe I will add some references and, along with the slides, and you organizers can share it with the participants. But for undergraduates, I think Good and Hat is the Bible for research methodology. That's where I started learning, and I still continue to use it.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have a question, maybe both you can interact with the participant. It's again very interesting question from Dr. Naveen Narayan from Jaipur. Now, the existing pandemic divided society into two categories, have and have nots. If one wanted to prove it, what should be done?
Yeah, that's really, I think, a fairly philosophical question, if I could put it, because I'm just starting on. I'm sure Dr. Madan will have his take on this, but I just thought I could bring this point on. When we really talking about this health crisis, if we go into the genesis, we have been playing this game of blame that this country didn't do that, and we couldn't do this, we didn't have enough time, etc., etc. But if we really go into the history, I think way back in November was the first case reported globally from the Wuhan province. And back in January itself, if we go by WHO's mandates, we were informed that there is a public health crisis, public health emergency, which is coming, and therefore all countries have to prepare themselves. So given that kind of a scenario, what was our preparedness? By our, I mean each of us as countries, each of us as states, and within the states, local regions. So the preparedness for combating, if I can use that word, because that's what has been used as warriors, etc., etc. Where were we when we were trying to design that? So perhaps there was something lacking over there. Therefore, this genesis of the haves and the have-nots. Why is it that some of us are in a position to access certain resources versus some of us are not able to? Not withstanding the historical deprivation which some population groups have experienced versus some of those who have not experienced. So when we collate that with COVID-19 scenario, the advent of the infection, if I may use that phrase, is largely considered to be through the travel which were happening from the infected areas. Wuhan, for example, our own first case was reported on 30th of January through a student who had returned from that province in Kerala. Right, and from that time point till we actually took any measure, employing the screening at the airport, we at least missed out on 45 to 50 days before we actually got down to process what was happening. When we suddenly embark upon a closure, a nationwide closure, there is very little time and preparedness that any one of us as individual citizen, state or different institutions which had to kind of prepare themselves to meet the crisis, address the crisis, was not really there. And therefore, the worst hit certainly was the vulnerable of the vulnerables. Migrant workers, for example, women, for example, we all know that data is suggestive of the fact that 50% of the domestic violence increased during this time period. Child abuse increases during this time period. And we really have no measurements, no measure to address this kind of scenarios. So when it actually comes out to testing this hypothesis, if I can call it, I don't think there is a need to evolve a hypothesis. It's an empirically evident scenario which we need to examine in terms of more of the processes. Why did it lead to a scenario such as this? Why was it that we had to be, when we are professing, wash your hands umpteen number of times, there are populations which don't have access to drinking water. We are not worried about that. We are talking about this. Not that it is not important. I'm not saying that. But what I'm probably saying is, instead of the fear, perhaps the precaution, which is more important. And by the same logic, therefore, if 1/3 of India's population lives in one-room housing units, how do we expect that kind of disease distance, which is expected to be maintained? So some of these logics to me become relevant in terms of examining these. I would stop here. Maybe Dr. Madan would want to bring in his ideas over there.
Dr. Sigamani, if you could repeat that question.
Just a minute.
You said have and have nots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is there any nuance to that question? Because
we have one more questions related to that. Shall I proceed with that?
Yes. You could club it.
Together.
Yeah, we can put together. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There is a question from Ms. Swati Gupta. Ma'am, will the various studies done related to pandemic period be useful in future?
Sorry, I didn't get I missed the thing.
Will the various studies done related to this pandemic period be useful in future?
I'm sure they will, because that's what research is all about. Some may be very good, some may be less good, but any activity done in the name of exploration, in the name of understanding what the scenario is, what the situation is, what are the causes, what are the outcomes, I'm sure it feeds into in building that larger body of knowledge. And therefore, I would say, even if it is not giving conducive results, it is useful, because that itself will propel the next level of investigation, next level of inquiry. I would say yes.
Yeah, we have another question from Dr. Selvaraj. If the research would be conducted separately as quantitative or qualitative or combined manner, which one could you consider as a significant and more relevant?
If we really look at the domains of conducting research, we know very well that there are very stark outliners when it comes to quantitative research versus qualitative research. And there are reasons for embarking upon one type of research over the other. But if we look at literature as it has evolved in perhaps last 10, 15 years, we see there's a tendency towards moving towards the mixed method approach towards research. And to me, I think it does hold some kind of strength, because it allows me to not only understand the situation, not only to be able to embark upon what is empirically relevant in terms of, I would say, quantification, for the lack of another alternative expression, and what is happening? Why is this happening? What are the processes which are leading towards this kind of outcome? What are the factors which are responsible for this kind of outcome is where we incorporate from the qualitative methods that can be put in. And that perhaps is the reason why why something has evolved as mixed method techniques, which actually allows us to use a combination right from the level of conceptualization. From conceptualization, when we are moving towards the data collection, how we use both the quantitative and the qualitative levels, and from there, perhaps necessarily at the interpretative level also, we use the techniques which are drawn from there for a reason, for a logic. Why that can be done, because there are certain questions we can answer better with the quantitative method versus certain other questions which we can answer better with qualitative. And I'm sure we probably will need another webinar to get into that.
Thank you, ma'am. Due to time constraint, we'll take 2 more questions. So we have another question from Professor Patrick. Madam, could you highlight what type of research leads to policy framing?
Sorry, leads to?
Policy framing, policy making.
Okay. If you allow me, I would say that any research which is done with a scientific path should lead to some kind of conversation with policy. Many times, much of the academic research is left at a step prior to policy planning level. So there are specific research which could be done for the purpose of policy formulation. There is specific research which could be done for evaluation purposes. So the nature of design, the design that you would employ, the formulation of your questions that you would use will differ accordingly. But in general, I would stand by the understanding that when I am embarking upon an inquiry, it should be able to lead me towards some kind of contribution in the policy making process. Likewise, for COVID-19 also, if all this research which is happening is in a position to tell us what exactly is required vis-a-vis A, B, C of the policy vis-a-vis COVID-19, I think we'd be very happy.
Last question, ma'am. We have many more questions, but I'll take up the last question. That's from Dr. Anand. Is it possible to achieve both reliability and validity together in qualitative research? Please give some input.
Okay. Yeah. See, to begin with, when we are embarking upon qualitative research, we must keep in mind that this is something which begins with an exploration of an idea, wherein we may be knowing something very, very scantily. So there is a possibility that we may not be able to achieve the validity and reliability in context of the way we would wish to do, and we often are in a position to do while employing quantitative research methods. Simply because what is employable or what is investigated for the study population may not be in a position to be generalized for the larger population. Simple reason could be the very quantum of population which is examined is fairly less. That itself may become a restrictive point for generalization. So from that perspective, until and unless a series of qualitative studies have been employed, generalization vis-a-vis validity may remain a question mark. Therefore, that can be attributed as one of the constraints when we do qualitative methods. Thank you,
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Let me take this opportunity to thank our resource persons.
Dr. Sigamari, could I make a final observation?
Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
I think from what I've heard in terms of queries or questions, let me make these quick points. First, I think haves and have-nots. I think what the outbreak of COVID-19 has highlighted is the existing marginalization. I mean, the marginalization of vulnerable sections of society, as Madam has rightly pointed out, has been there before. But the outbreak of the pandemic has brought that crisis to the fore, what they call as, quote, breaching experiment, unquote. So in a way, I think it is Naveen who asked this question from Jaipur, if I remember.
Yes, yes.
The COVID-19 crisis seems to have a disproportionate impact on the have-nots. That's the first one. The second, mixed methods are generally preferable in social research. However, the method that is relevant, that is appropriate, depends on the question that you pose and the theoretical perspective in which your question is anchored. So in a way, theory and method are inseparable. If your theory is critical theory, then your methodological position would be critical social science research. So that's on the point about method, mixed methods, whether they could be used. I think they ought to be used, preferably mixed methods, because mixed methods would also pave the way for a cutting edge interdisciplinary research. And finally, I think most of you may be aware of this useful source by Deborah Lupton, Doing Fieldwork in a Pandemic. I think that's available on Google. And I think the interesting point is that this resource material has been there even before the outbreak of the pandemic. But now I think its relevance is all the more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me take this opportunity to thank our resource persons, Professor Sangamitra Acharya and Dr. Madan, for their fascinating critical discourse analysis. It reminded me my JNU days and most stimulating scholarly presentations, and delegates for their active participation. Thank you, everyone. Now let me request Dr. Bernard to present concluding remarks and vote of thanks. Over to you, Dr. Bernard, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sigamani. Very difficult to wrap up the two presentations, scholarly presentations, and difficult also to give, precisely what both of them have said. But broadly, I would say that Dr. Sangamitra has pointed out more on, relatively more on quantitative methods, and Dr. Madan on qualitative methods. And the question in the context of COVID-19 is this: whether problem-driven research has overtaken the method-driven research. Is it method-driven research has overtaken the problem-driven research, or problem-driven research has overtaken the method-driven research? I think we have come to a point now in the context of COVID-19, both the method and the problem has relevance. And one has to be at the help of another. In that way only, I think one will be able to understand more the COVID-19. And particularly, I think the social science has a lot to do with the COVID-19, particularly among the policy research area, the COVID, in understanding COVID-19, I think the social science to a greater extent has failed us. In other words, the social science has more to do with, the COVID-19 and understanding the pandemic from the social context. That way, I think very important that we combine the method-driven and the problem-driven has to come to effect come to help one another. And maybe COVID-19 also is posing us another challenge. Fairbond would put it as against methods. Is it also time for us to look for privileging one over another, quantitative and qualitative, mixed? And more than that, whether it is time for mobile methodologies, both the researcher and the research area, when it becomes mobile, I think more we will learn in this context of COVID-19. What the question has been put to the two panelists or two speakers on the haves and have-nots, impact on the haves and have-nots, as Dr. Madan has put it, more on the have-nots. It has hit, very badly the have-nots, the migrants, women, children, and marginalized communities are suffering most. So in that way, whether our research methodology, social science research can lead to this is a very big question. So that way, I think both of you have really provoked the participants with provoked enough and provoked deeply the participants with more questions. And I think this will be a starting point for the participants to move on to take up research on any areas, particularly the social science, and different perspectives on COVID-19. This is also time for me to thank a lot of people who are responsible for organizing this joint webinar. And particularly, I would like to thank the two speakers. And both of them, Dr. Sangamitra and Dr. Madan, they have accepted our invitation. The moment we invited them, the moment we told them that the methodological rigor, both of them, being the research methodology being closer to the heart of both of them have accepted. So I sincerely thank Dr. Sangamitra and Dr. Madan for having accepted and also being with us today to spell out some of the important areas, some of the important research questions relating to COVID-19. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my own principal, Father Thomas, who himself is a social scientist and interested in research. His interest has been social science research, and gave me a lot of incentives and a lot of he has really initiated this webinar, particularly taking this webinar forward in terms of how the social science is looking at COVID-19. So in that way, I take this opportunity to thank Father Thomas, Principal of Loyola College and Director of LISSTAR, for initiating this whole series of research, social science research, in the context of COVID-19. Would like to also thank the technical team who has been working very hard, from the day the registration started to this day, bringing it in the YouTube. I thank Dr. Xavier Raj, Mr. Samson, Mr. Peter, Mr. Aguilan, and Mr. Victor of LISSTAR for being the backbone for this webinar. I also would like to thank all the participants, as I indicated in the beginning of this webinar, that your response has been overwhelming. Namely, more than 1,500 have registered. I'm sure that many of you have participated, and definitely you have been our resource, and we will be organizing more on research methodology related to COVID-19. With this, I would like to thank, not but not least, the co-host and the idea suggested by the idea for this research methodology webinar is suggested by Dr. Sigamani of the Central University of Tamil Nadu, and both of us, we have been in conversation with each other every day in taking this forward. Dr. Sigamani, a special thanks to you for being a co-host and for organizing it with your department and with your university, and looking forward for more such collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you all. Stay safe, healthy, and be connected. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
very much for organizing this wonderful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining, Dr. Sanghamitra, Dr. Madhu Mohan. We certainly enjoyed the presentation, and it was very insightful and exciting.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we can leave.